All right, welcome everyone to this Q&A. Again, I want to welcome everyone to this Q&A. Question came in, which I didn't get to on Tuesday. Question was that someone asked if Yuval Raphael was a victim on the October 7th massacre. Yeah, should she be in a song contest dressed immodestly? And what does this type of action result in based on the Torah? Yeah, a woman in general, regardless whether, they were in this massacre and survived or not, or, in general, they want to sing, not a problem. Want to sing in front of men? That's a problem. They want to be dressed immodestly? Also a problem, right? But again, you're talking about a secular person, so I don't really understand the question. First of all, it doesn't matter. They were part of this massacre. They didn't get killed. Pretty miraculous, this whole thing. But, in the end, the people that were there were secular people, right? That's not like earth shattering. It's not news. That's not news to anyone. And desecrating Shabbos, desecrating the festival, having a Buddha there, and all that. That didn't help their cause at all. But again, it's not necessarily the reason, why it happened. Nobody really knows why it happens. It's divine decree, but again, that, certainly didn't help. That whole thing certainly didn't help. But in general, this has nothing to do with whether they're at the festival or not. You have a secular woman dressing immodestly. Okay, so she probably doesn't know that much about modesty, which is understandable. And she's going to sing in front of men. So that's a problem. So you could say, well, what if the majority of people, forget how she dressed, that's already one issue. But let's say the majority of people there are non-Jews. Yeah. Can an immodestly Jewish woman sing in front of non-Jews? Not a problem. Right? In other words, her voice being illicit, it applies to Jews, not to non-Jews. So if the majority are non-Jews, okay. If there are Jews there, Jewish men there, not allowed to listen. They shouldn't even be there. But okay. But in general, the way she's dressed, yeah, it's an issue. But again, anyone, any secular Jew, it's not, this isn't rocket science. If it's warm out, they're gonna, or not, or whatever, they'll dress the way they want, right? So, dressing immodestly is not such a, it's not, it's a problem. It's for sure a problem. But this has nothing to do with whether, you know, you know, she was there at, what do you call it, on October 7th. One thing has nothing to do with another. You might think people that, got saved there, there are some that, now have tremendously strong faith, in God and are, keeping some level of Torah mitzvahs. Okay, that's a huge thing. That's a very huge thing. Person's not going to change overnight, right? The Brisker Rov would say that if a person's not a vessel to change, God could do miracles for them. They're still not going to change. Right? Because someone from America asked him, if God would do more miracles, then more people would come back to Torah mitzvahs. So the Brisker Rov said that's only true if they're a vessel to be able to accept it. In other words, they have to be holding somewhere in the world. Because they could come up with, 50 different reasons, 100 different reasons why it wasn't a miracle, why they don't have to change, and all this. But he said you have to be a vessel to change. Yeah, so there were some people for sure, that escaped, or weren't killed or whatever happened, that have come closer to God and closer to Torah. That's true. I mean, it's sad you need a massacre to do that, but okay. But that's very true. Now, is it surprising, even if somebody was there or not there or brought up in, normal Israeli society, as a secular Jew, that they're going to dress that way? It's not surprising, right? That's the way they're brought up. They don't know any better. They would not know any better. Yeah. So I'm not so sure, what this has to do with October 7th, right? Who cares? You might tell me I mean, I'm just guessing here. Anyone's guess is as good as mine, but you might tell me that the fact that they were there and they were spared, so that gives them now a higher awareness and God saved them. So, maybe they have a higher purpose now, and that's what they still do, and they don't come back to Torah and, and mitzvahs, again, not surprising. There's a story, I'll tell a story. There's a story with, I think it was with Rabbi Q Levenstein of blessed memory. He was on he was the spiritual mentor, the mashgiach of the Mir Yeshiva in Mir and in Ponovich in Bnei Brak, and he was in a taxi. He was in a cab, and the taxi driver says, "I'm not related, but let me tell you the story." To tell the story, it was after I think it was after he was in the army. And they went to, I don't know, they're in Africa somewhere. Usually, anyone does the army, when they're 18, 19, after like 2 years, 3 years, they go travel, right? Israelis go travel. They go to Nepal, they go to, what do you call it? They go to Thailand, they go to other places. So I think they were in Africa. And there was so one night, one of the guys was like, screaming, and there was a snake. There's a huge snake that was whatever, basically, choking to get to death one of one of his friends. So they didn't know what to do, because if they shot at it or whatever, he could die as well. So like that the snake is getting stronger and stronger, the guy's getting weaker and weaker. So finally, the only thing they knew was Shema Yisrael. So they told this guy, say Shema Yisrael. So he screamed out, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Immediately after he said that, so the snake left. Snake let loose the grip, and the snake left. And he survived. So became an Orthodox Jew, right? Became an Orthodox Jew through this whole ordeal. So Rabbi Q Levenstein asked him, okay, very good, very nice story, very nice story. And he said, well, so what happened to you? He goes, how come you didn't change? Yeah. He said, you witnessed an open miracle. So how come you didn't change? So what the guy say? What the taxi driver say? He said, you're right. You know why I didn't change? Well, it didn't happen to me. Not a joke. But he witnessed the miracle, but the fact was, why is he still secular? Because he said the miracle didn't happen to me. It happened to him. So he became religious, makes sense. But you saw an open miracle, right? That's the irony of the story. You yourself saw the open miracle. So how can it be you didn't change? Because it wasn't fitting for this person to change. Even though we saw an open miracle. Right? You can't explain it otherwise. This guy was about to be, snake sandwich over here, being choked an inch of his life. And then all of a sudden he screams out, Shema Yisrael. And the snake leaves its grip and goes, slithers away. Like, what are the odds of that? Probably very slim. Right? Probably zero. But again, even if the point is, as the Brisker said, even if a person would see an open miracle does not mean the person's going to change. Even if he saw it right in front of his face, you see this example. This is a very good example. The fact that the person witnessed it, but his answer was, what didn't happen to me? So who cares it didn't happen to you? You're seeing something right in front of your face you can't explain. You cannot explain rationally. You cannot say God did not do that. Right? It doesn't make sense otherwise. You say he got lucky. Maybe he said an incantation. With Shema Yisrael. He said Shema Yisrael. Acknowledging God's the true judge, one God in the world. No matter what intention his was. Probably didn't have much intention. That's the only thing he knew. And that saved him. That saved his life. But for someone to be able to see it, for someone to see it and not change is pretty amazing. Yeah, you got to be a vessel to change. Wait, guys. Says the Brisker of. Right? It has to affect you. It has, it's got to change you. There's a story of a woman, the book's called The View from Above. Secular Israeli woman by a building site got clocked on the head by a steel beam, 5 stories up. Clinically dead, out of body experience, came back to her body. 7 years. 7 years, if I remember correctly, took her to become an Orthodox Jew. Again, after rehabilitation, other things she went through. I'm sure everyone was going to convince her, don't worry about it. Sometimes these things happen. Why are you going to look into religion? I'm sure people tried to, cool her down, so to speak, when she started looking into things. Right? But that's a major thing. But again, a major thing like that does not mean that a person's going to change. You would think it's obvious. Something happened like that, you can't explain it according to nature. You would think a person's going to search. A person's going to look for meaning now. Now they have a second chance. Some people might, other people chalk it up to, statistics, chalk it up to, luck, chalk it up to who knows what. They chalk it up to a lot of things. But again, as the Brisker of himself said, bottom line is that you got to be a vessel, right? Right? You got to be a vessel in order that you'll be able to see it, right? In other words, to witness the miracle and to internalize the message, not so simple. Because even if someone sees it, what does that all mean in general? It means, God did a miracle, he saw the miracle, let's say, and now God wants something, he has to change, but change is hard. Changing one character trait. Says Rabbi Q, the father of the Muslim movement, a blessed memory. Changing one character trait is hard. We're getting bad habits, I've spoken about this a lot, right? Getting bad habits, other things, guess what? At the end of the day, it's hard to change, right? Very, very hard to change. Yeah. So this question, about this woman dressed immodestly, what can you expect? Growing up as a secular Israeli, no great shakes. When it comes to modesty or it comes to, religiosity in general, right? That's not shocking. Maybe you tell me the shocking thing is, I'm just, saying, maybe the shocking thing is the fact that came out of the Nova Festival October 7th, and, didn't change them. Did not change them. 1,200 people were massacred, slaughtered, burnt alive. I mean, crazy things. They were spared. Again, someone goes through that, you'd have to ask the question, why were they spared? Why did it happen to them? Why did, their friends get burnt and killed and all that? Right? So if it doesn't move somebody to change, God can do an open miracle, it won't change them. That's the point. So the fact they went through it, you might think, oh, they got greater responsibility. Now, because there are certain people that came out of this that became more religious because of it. Okay. Tremendous amount of respect for that. No question. Can other people go back to their regular everyday lives? I mean, it's going to be hard with all the psychological torture and everything else they went through, but in general, one day they're going to ask the question, why were they spared? Are they going to ask the question how they survived? And all these other things? Maybe some will. I'm not, we don't know. Maybe some will. Maybe But at the end of the day, people went through it who survived. Okay, they may be scarred for life. Who says they're going to change? Change is hard. Might lose your friends, might lose family. I mean, there's a lot a person has to lose, right? So even if they would admit, wow, this is so unique, I never should have survived, and this happened and that happened, and other things happened. I was taken captive for so many days, for whatever, for so long, and still with all the bombing, and still didn't get killed, and they didn't kill me, and whatever. I would think it may wake up a person, but some people, even with all that, won't wake up. So again, that's also, I'm not here to judge one way or another, right? But at the end of the day, God does a miracle for somebody. God could easily say, "Why'd I do it? Why'd I do it? You didn't change. You didn't do anything." Yeah. But even if God sees a little bit of change, that's huge. That's a huge thing, but it's not shocking. They didn't get the message. So if they don't get the message, how are they going to change? And even if they wanted to change, it's not going to be so easy, considering the environment they live in and grew up in. Right? But, is it shocking that somebody like that, would, go in front of thousands of people dressed the way they are and doing what they're doing? Not shocking. Unless you're going to look at it in context and say that, well, they were spared, God spared them for a reason, they should look into things or whatever. Okay. That you might have a case. That you might have a question on, but the fact that the way they grew up and they did this, even if they went through October 7th, why is that shocking the way they dressed? Yeah. Why is it shocking or even a question, so to speak, dress them obviously doing what they're doing. It's not, not really shocking. That's what they do. That's who they are. Again, you can only say, well, maybe things should have affected them. Maybe should look into more things, within Judaism. Okay, could say that. 100%. You could say that. And if not, let's say they didn't go through October 7th. Yeah. Is there any question that that's what people would do and the way they would dress? I don't think it's any question. The fact they went through October 7th, okay. But otherwise I wouldn't say that. Somebody asked, what do I think about a suggestion, maybe a rabbi recently during a podcast, that women fear the risk of becoming a guno, should consider becoming pelagshos. I didn't hear it, but it's an interesting question. Meaning, if a woman gets married, yeah, and the husband will not grant the bill of divorce. It's called an aguna. What's an aguna? Chained woman. She can't get married. She can't get married unless he grants her a bill of divorce. Now, there's certain things they can try and do to him without forcing him to give a bill of divorce. But, in general, there's a problem. Yeah, you got recalcitrant husbands. They don't, they're vindictive. They don't want to get divorced. They don't want to give their wife a bill of divorce. Right? Again, the system's not going to change. He has to give the bill of divorce. Right? It's harder for him to make a commitment. He makes the acquisition, quote unquote, under the chuppah. Right? He says to the woman in front of two witnesses, you are sanctified to me. Kedas Moshe Yisrael. Like the law of Moses and the Jewish people. Because it's harder for him to commit. If it's harder for him to commit, then he's good. So you make him make this statement. You make him make what we call the kedusha, the sanctification. So if he has to be the one to make it, he has to be the one to break it. Now, isn't there a problem? Some guys, if they get divorced, they can be very angry and say, I'm not going to give a bill of divorce. Could they do that? They could do that. Isn't that against the system? Yeah. Right? You're right. Not a good thing. So, they've come up with some ingenious ideas. I just heard a story today that the husband tried to extract, if I remember correctly, about $3 million from this woman in order from his ex-wife, to get divorced. Like, obviously she didn't have the money, and this woman was trapped for 11 years. And the guy came to Israel, and the first time in history they're able to force someone through the police that he wasn't allowed to leave the country, right? So they did certain things. Lawyers and Rabbonim on the side of the woman did certain things to make it very uncomfortable for this guy. And basically they put him in jail. They put him in jail, fined him about $150,000. Right? Tried to escape once, tried to go to the airport once and whatever. So they fined him, a lot. But basically, he kept changing the story, different things, and finally they just told him, listen, you have no hope of ever leaving the country unless you give this woman a bill of divorce. If not, you'll never get out of the country. You'll never leave. So they put a lot of pressure, and then eventually gave a get. Right? So now the question, so that's a little bit of background. So now the question is that if a woman's afraid if she gets married, that husband will give a bill of divorce. So in the modern Orthodox community, they have a prenuptial agreement. They've had prenuptial agreement probably for the last, 40 years, something like that. Right? Meaning that they both sign that the husband agrees if they get divorced, he agrees that he'll go to whatever rabbinical court and grant his wife a bill of divorce. In other words, that's part of the agreement. Now, in the ultra-Orthodox community, they haven't done it. The reason, I've heard some rabbis say they're closer to writing a certain version. They don't like the version that the modern Orthodox community uses or whatever. So whatever, they're still working on something like that, which, maybe in the near future, they'll have such a thing, and that'll take care of a lot of the problems. But, even so the question is, okay, so if a woman is afraid she's going to get stuck and she won't be able to remarry, so then the idea is to let her marry someone else. It's not married, not with a ksuva, because a pilegish is what we call like a concubine, right? A pilegish is without a ksuva, without a marriage document. Yeah, and we don't really have, we don't have them today, for a number of reasons. But so the question was, you have to send me the podcast. I'll have to listen to it and see. But someone suggested that because of that fear, in other words, don't get married, don't be legally married, i.e., with a ksuva, with a marriage, with a Jewish marriage document. So instead of not being married, you become a pilegish, right? In other words, that would solve the problem, because even, if, they decide not to be together, she doesn't have any status like that. She's not stuck, right? She's not stuck over here, right? So, I don't know. I have to hear what this person said, but I don't imagine too many people are going to sanction it. I can't imagine anyone's really going to sanction it. I mean, it's an interesting idea because there's a fear, okay? Right? There's a fear that she'll be stuck. Granted, but does that take you out of the problem? I mean, it will take you out of the problem. It cause other problems, but that would take you out of the problem of not being able to get married. Okay, well then what? So let's say that relationship doesn't work out. Then what do? Let's say you have another relationship. Okay, but you don't get married. So again, it would be easier. You don't have to worry about remarriage. You don't have to You don't have to worry about the husband giving a get, because they both walk away and that's it. It's not a problem, right? That would take care of that problem. True. That is true. But here you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about a married man, right? Who basically has a mistress, right? Who has a concubine. Now the problem is there was a decree of Rabbeinu Gershom. So the decree of Rabbeinu Gershom was you can't have more than one wife, right? You can't have more than one wife. So you say that decree was up about, I don't know, the last 10 years, I think. It's been now technically invalid, but we still hold by it. So that you can tell me, well, it's not really an answer because that is based on the fact they get married. Can have more than one wife, right? To be married. So again, this would solve a problem, yeah. This would definitely solve a problem for women that are afraid, that they won't get divorced, that they won't be able to get a bill of divorce, right? But I think there are other issues with it. Not that would take care of that problem, right? But no one's sanctioning it, right? Certainly, no one in the ultra Orthodox community is sanctioning it and saying, oh, that's what we should do, right? I haven't heard anyone say that. So you'll have to send me a copy of the podcast and see who said it, what the context was, right? But no one's sanctioning that. Again, it would solve one problem. Yeah, it's true. It would definitely solve a problem. 100%. Right? But no, I can't imagine anyone's going to sanction it. Could sponsoring a kiddush someone has to be a segula? A segula for what? Usually, a person has a kiddush, they have a child for bar mitzvah. If I don't know, they can sponsor a kiddush for anything. For they just made a lot of money in a business deal. Sponsor a kiddush for that. Giving thanks. Right? Could it be a good omen? Could be. Definitely could be. Could someone, sponsor a kiddush because, they're doing it because they want to meet they want to have good livelihood. They want to, meet a marriage partner or something like that. They could. They definitely could. Right? I don't think it's a problem to do it. You could do it. I'll definitely do it. Someone here says after he survived, the Nova Festival became a religious Jew. All right. The question is singing though. So was he doing singing and other things? Or whatever. I have to see. I have to see about that. One second. Um. All right. One second. Yeah. Let me see. Any other questions here? Someone says, I heard that King Solomon does know almost the entire Torah and billions of secrets except secrets behind the red heifer. Okay, so wisest of all men. He was considered the wisest of all men. Okay. Right, 100%. That's true. Right, that's very true. Right. And so it's interesting that King David's with Bathsheba, and they have this child, and he becomes the future king, right? So there's always the question people ask, look what happened over here. You read Psalm 51, Nathan the prophet, chastises King David for what he did. But the Gemara says anyone who says that King David sinned is making a mistake, because it's very clear. Very clear, first of all, she wasn't a married woman. And the reason is because anyone who went out to war, they gave their wives the bill of divorce, retroactive bill of divorce. Meaning, if they don't come back, she's considered divorced, so she wasn't married. If he does come back, different issue, right? So since he didn't come back, she wasn't a married woman at the time. And the second thing is he sent Uriah Hittite, sent him to the front. And there's a question, why did he do that? Right? That was her husband. Right? So it doesn't look good if you're the king. You send someone to the front and then you take his wife, right? Seemingly, person would say it doesn't look so good. Okay. Okay, very good. Now, the case is like this. The case is Uriah Hittite was liable for death penalty anyway. It's considered a morid b'malchus. Morid b'malchus means he was rebellious against the king. So if he's rebellious against the king, he's got a death sentence. So really, he didn't do anything wrong. Right? Now, if you tell me the way it looks, you read through the verses, it looks bad. Okay. But again, the Gemara makes very clear. Anyone says that he sinned, is making a mistake. Because we have two technical issues here. The first issue is what? The first issue is that she wasn't married. She wasn't considered married. The second issue is that he deserved the death penalty anyway. So what he did, really, the person had a death sentence on them. So then you ask, okay, so what did he do wrong? So then why, the verses look, like they are. Obviously got to know what's behind them. But again, it didn't make a mistake here. You can tell me it doesn't look good. Okay, but that's because you don't know, what's going on. Right? So at his level, even so, he does get chastised. He does get chastised by Nathan the prophet. But nonetheless, again, technically speaking, he didn't do anything wrong. In that case, he didn't do anything wrong. Now, let's just get back to this other question because, it's kind of interesting. So someone mentions that this person survived an old fest and became a religious Jew. Okay. Yeah. If that's the case, so let's say he's part of this, this Eurovision thing or whatever, right? Singing. Right? Let's say an Orthodox Jew in general, can they be singing with women? No. Forbidden to sing with women. Right? So you got a problem there, if that's the case. Singing in public for a guy is not a problem. Whether he should sing to a mixed crowd, men and women together, it's a different issue. Right? There are religious singers that will sing, to a mixed crowd as long as they're separate. In other words, separate seating. Okay, you have a mixed crowd. It's not good to have a mixed crowd and have a concert. So if they're sitting in different areas, separate, okay. Yeah. But someone to sing in front of a mixed crowd is a problem. That sin would be a problem. Right? Now, if the claim is true that the person dressed is not dressed modestly, that's an issue. Right? Depends where he's holding, being a religious Jew. There again, some things are hard to give up, even if that's the case. Even if that's the case. Yeah. There's a very fine line over here. Right? Again, if a person's going to sing and there's a mixed crowd, they're going to be separate. If they're not, if they're not going to, be separate, how could they sing to them? But again, men, just as women, have modesty, guidelines. So if they're dressed immodestly in general, that would be a problem. That would be a problem, right? I'd also have an issue, and probably more of an issue. Let's say you have an Orthodox singer, and he dresses for concerts, let's say in a flamboyant way, like a non-Jewish, like anyone in the non-Jewish, music industry. I'd also have an issue with that. Yeah. Well, even if they'd be singing to all men, make it very simple. Even if they were singing to all men, but they're dressed to kill, like in the secular world, let's say. I don't have an issue with that. Because that's the way non-Jews do it. It's one thing, that's what you're going to do, okay. Right? You got to do it the right way. The story of someone who wanted to convert was was a rapper, and basically wanted to continue doing the same thing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe change the lyrics a little bit, whatever. But basically, I don't think so. But basically, from story I heard, wanted to sing in the same way, same genre. And the rabbinical court said, we will not, we're not going to convert you that way. We will convert you, but you can't, you have to do it in a different way. You cannot do it the same way you want to do it. Now, that was the test for this person. Is he gonna listen to what the rabbinical court says? Now, obviously, if they're gonna sing gangster rap or whatever, that's a problem. The lyrics are a problem. For sure, a problem. So this was a big test. And this guy said, no, that's what I want to do. So Basin says, fine, we're not going to convert you. Right? They're not going to put their name, even if he's ready to convert. Right? Even if he's ready to convert, right? This is a major problem. First of all, not listening to what the rabbis say. That's one problem. Right? But this is a much bigger problem. And that is, I want to do what I want to do. Yeah, I'll keep kosher. I'll keep Shabbos. I'll keep whatever I need to keep. This I'm not willing to do. But how is that going to look if the rabbinical court converts such a person? I'm not saying they're cutting corners in other aspects of Jewish observance. I'll say, but in this aspect, we'll just take this aspect. So somebody converts, and the rabbinical court allows them to sing like they normally would, like these other rappers. That is going to give them a bad name. It's going to give them a really bad name. See, so I'm not into rap in general, but you take somebody that used to rap, right? That used to rap. Yeah, Nissim Black, let's say. Take somebody like Nissim Black. Yeah. So his lyrics are very different. His lyrics are very different than what he started with. That's a different issue. But also, he's not doing the same thing. Yeah. Going in front of Jewish groups, whatever it is. Making videos, other things, okay. But he's doing it the right way. So if someone comes along and says, I'm going to do it my way, and it's my way, the highway, then the rabbinical court's going to say no. But there's a deeper problem there. It's not just going to say, I want to do what I want. That's part of it. Right? But the other part of it is, no one's going to give their stamp of approval on such a thing. And that person did not want to bow to religious authority. That's also a problem. Right? It's also a problem. One of the greatest lines I heard, someone converted, and I was there in the rabbinical court, and the rabbinical court tells them, it was right before Rosh Hashanah, so they asked them, so the rabbinical court says, well, if we tell you that, you have to move to a stronger Jewish community, what would you say? They say, whatever you tell us to do, that's what we're going to do. We have to move, we'll move. What if we say you can't convert till after all the holidays? Right? You have to go through Rosh Hashanah, you have to go 10 days of repentance, you have to go through Yom Kippur, you have to go through Sukkot. They said, whatever you tell us to do, we're not going anywhere. Whatever you tell us to do, that's what the rabbinical court wanted there. In other words, it doesn't make them God, but they're the ones calling the shots. They're not gonna, they don't want anyone to make them look stupid also. But they want to see that a person has an awareness of rabbinic authority and what a rabbinic authority says. Again, it could be abused. I'm not talking about that case. Talking about a case where they say, if we would tell you this, what would you do? If we would tell you that, what would you do? They're not outrageous claims. But the answer was, and that was the right answer, what they wanted to hear, is that we'll do whatever you tell us to do. Like, if you tell us we can't convert and we're going to be non-Jews all the holidays, okay. If you tell us we have to move to a better community, okay. Like, we're not going to budge. We're going to do whatever you tell us to do. Somebody asked, what if I'm Orthodox Jews? Can I be a Zionist? You could be a Zionist if you want. If you were to ask me about being a Zionist, I would say no. But can an Orthodox Jew be a Zionist? Yeah. They're going to say, but, aren't you a Zionist? You live here. Yeah, so what? I've lived here 29 or last 32 years I've been here. Okay. Do we live in an Orthodox country? No. Who's running the country there for us? The mixed multitude. Zionists are not lovers of Orthodox Jews by any stretch. Yeah. Secular Zionists, they'd ship us out straight away if they could. Yeah, the state has not been good to Orthodox Jews. I think it's the best place to live as a Jew, but you know, if someone wants to wave the flag and celebrate Independence Day and do other things, they can't. I'm not saying they can't, right? But understand what it is. And the Zionists would be very happy if we didn't have any religion there. If there's like very little Judaism there. They'd be ecstatic. Can't force us to do things, can't close roads on Shabbos. We could eat pork, we could do anything. Yeah, that's what they want. That's essentially what they want. Yeah, and they're looking to make our lives a misery. That's what they want. They don't want anything having to do with Judaism. Right? Religious Zionists is different issue. But again, even by religious Zionists, sometimes they make living in the land the biggest mitzvah in the world. Like it's the only mitzvah. Yeah. A religious Zionist rabbi told me that it's more important to do the army if you have the opportunity to do the army in Israel than learn Torah. I'm not saying all of them believe that, but a lot of them do. That means that we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kula. There's nothing more important than learning Torah, but sometimes Torah gets, superseded because of Pikuach Nefesh, saving lives. Right? Definitely saving lives. Yeah. But in general, even though we always had a standing army in the time of King David, you needed people to learn, very good. But bottom line is is there anything more important in general than learning Torah? And that answer is no. There's nothing more important. You say it's Milchemes Mitzvah, we got to go to war, everyone has to fight. Very good. Very good, that's true, if that would be the case. But you need people to learn also for their protection. Okay. But anybody, let's make this very clear, anybody's going to tell you that, serving in the IDF, right, serving, in the Israeli army is more important than learning Torah. I'm not saying you don't have an army. I'm not saying that. You need people to serve. No question. But to say serving, even not in a time of war, is more important than Torah, that's heresy. That 100% is hobby courses. That's heresy. Because they're saying that's more important than learning Torah. So I had somebody, someone I went to yeshiva with at the army, and basically said if I wasn't in the army, Syria would come and invade. So I said, it only took you about a half an hour to be a heretic. So he said, what do you mean? He said, I keep Shabbos, I keep kosher. I said, do you believe in God? Yes. Do you believe in Torah? He said, yes. Do you believe in the power of Torah? Yes. Do you believe in the power of Torah can save lives? By people sitting and learning and praying? Yes. So it came out, his issue wasn't, everyone should do the army. His issue was that there were more religious people would have made his army service easier. Okay, but that's a very different thing. That's a very different thing. So we're not saying, you should never have an army, just sit and learn, and everything's going to be great. You need to stay in an army. Everyone agrees. Right? Everyone agrees. Now, it just happens in Israel that majority of the army are reserves. Now you got this problem. You had reservists called up, a lot because of what's going on the last 2 years. There are more people in the army to be called less. Okay. Right? That's true. But you got to be Machshiv Torah. You got to think Torah's doing something there. Yeah. You're not going to throw everybody in. Not everyone's going to be able to do things. Okay. But you need people to sit and learn. You need people to pray. It could be a lot worse. A lot worse. Someone came to the Brisker Rav and told them during the 6-day war. Said, look at the miracle. Look at, there are only like 2,000 people killed. They were expecting 50,000 or more people to die during the 6-day war. So they said 2,000 people. So 2,000 people, each person's their own world, right? So comes on the Brisker Rav and says, you're right to a point. 2,000, yeah, it should have been a lot worse. But you know what? If we were doing our job right, he said, if we, the Orthodox Jews, were learning properly, praying properly, nobody should have died. Not even 2,000. Nobody should have died. Yeah? So look how many people have died in this war. That's what war is. But still, you need both. You need people to fight. You need people to, to learn. So somebody wants to be a Zionist. They can't. I'm not saying they can't be, but understand what they've done. Understand that. They could have saved the state of Israel before it became a state. Right before it became a state. They had an opportunity to take in thousands of refugees, to ransom thousands of Jews that were, under Nazi control, Yamach Shemon V'Zichron, and they be brought out, may they rot. They could have ransomed tens of thousands. Yeah, they didn't want. Why didn't they want? Just like they told my Rebbe's Rebbe, Moshe Schneider, they didn't want him to come to Israel. They didn't want to give him a visa. Why not? They said, we don't want your old laws. We don't want old people. We don't want your old laws. We don't want your European laws. We're new Israelis. Nothing to do with Torah. Nothing to do with Torah. He said, you idiots, I'm coming to purify the land. You guys are making it impure. They didn't want him. They did not want them. They have a lot of blood on their hands. The secular Zionists. A lot of blood on their hands. And we're suffering from it until today. But if it wouldn't be Orthodox Jews here, the whole place would look like Tel Aviv. The whole place would look like Tel Aviv. Yeah. And they didn't want to come to Jerusalem. No, Jerusalem is different. It looks different. It is different, for a lot of reasons. But it's only because the Orthodox Jews are here. So now, let's ask the question again. Can I be an Orthodox Jew and a Zionist? Yes. You could be. Should you be? So I would say no. You want to be, you can do whatever you want. Right? Being a Zionist and waving the flag, remember, the song of Hatikva, part of the song is they want to be an Am Chovshi, a free nation. Simple explanation is free nation, a Jewish nation, be able to support ourselves, fight for ourselves, no pogroms. That's why they fled Europe, Russia, drenched in Jewish blood. Very good. But what does Am Chovshi also mean? This is what they mean as well. A free nation means a free nation without Torah mitzvahs. Herzl Schmerzel, if you read the book, The Jewish State, which I would never recommend, but if you would read it, good bathroom material reading, right? If you would read it, it had nothing to do with Judaism. The Zionist state has nothing to do with Judaism. It's about living in a land. Yeah, the ancestral homeland, very good. The ancestral homeland's all about keeping Torah mitzvahs. Read the Bible. Read the Bible from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Deuteronomy. That's what it's all about. Right? It's all about being in the land, but keeping what the Torah says. Right? The book of Leviticus, it says God differentiated us from the nations. We don't eat the same food. He didn't take us out of Egypt so we could go in the land and eat shrimp and be like the other nations. Right? We're reading that this week. In the second Torah portion. You go in the ways of us. What God wants, you don't go in the ways of non-Jews. So what separates Israelis from anybody else? Nothing. Except Torah mitzvahs. Just because they speak Hebrew very good, so what? Yeah, it's all about Torah mitzvahs. If you're coming to the land and you want the land, what's the whole purpose of the land? Yeah, it's the holiness of the land. That's the purpose. The purpose is come, live, work the land, all that. Take truma ma'isa, take tithes, from fruits and vegetables, and keep Torah to the highest level. That's the goal. That's what we're supposed to be doing. I tell people, you want to come to the land, you're just going to fool around and mess around and do whatever you want. Better not to come here. Because even if you do it outside the land, it's bad. Whatever the transgression is, you do it in the land, it's 10 times worse. 100 times worse. Mordechai Pogromonsky, a blessed memory, was a absolute Torah genius, in Telz. And my everyone went to get a blessing from him after the war. He was in France. Went to see him in France. So the Rebbe told him, he's on his way. He wants to go to Eretz Yisrael. And he wants to go to the land of Israel. So Mordechai Pogromonsky said, do you know every time you speak Lashon Hara in the land of Israel, you know how bad it is? Every time you transgress in the land of Israel, you know how bad it is? He said, I can never do it. I'd be too afraid. So until he promised, it's going to be very strong, and he's going to work very hard not to transgress, and this and that, eventually he gave him a blessing, but he said he could never come. Said he could never come. Rabbi Yisrael Leib Diskin, Yeshua Leib Diskin, the Brisker, the Rabbi Brisk came at the end of his life, came to Israel. He lived not very far from the Western Wall. So he felt, but he never went. He once walked, and he got close enough, and then he went home. Then he went home. Why? He said the holiness of the place is so great. He was terrified. Terrified. Yeah. Okay, so he came here, but again, what's the point of being in the land? It's to keep Torah mitzvahs. It's not about eating falafel. Not about speaking Hebrew. Yeah? It's about keeping Torah mitzvahs. So we're all Zionists in a certain way. Anyone who lives there, you just don't believe necessarily in the state because the state itself is not run according to Torah. Or everyone said, interesting enough, I don't remember who he said it in the name of, either the Brisker Rav, a blessed memory, or the Rebbe of Belz, the Rebbe. He said every time a person's in the bathroom in Israel, when you go to the bathroom, we'll keep this clean, yeah? You're doing a positive command of the Torah of living in the land. You get the mitzvah of living in the land, yeah, by being in the bathroom. So as my Rebbe, I said, wow, what a great thing. I said, it doesn't matter what I read. I can read anything in the bathroom, and I still get the mitzvah of living in the land. I still get that mitzvah. He's like, all right, whatever. I was like, really? It doesn't matter. It's like, all right, I made the point. Like, that's it. Yeah. That's a big thing. But a person wants to come in the land, do whatever they want, better they stay home. Better they stay home. So again, you want to wave the flag. Okay. Yeah. But understand what it is. Understand what it means to live in the land. Living in the land is not just about waving the flag. It's not about might makes right. It's about Torah mitzvahs. That's the whole purpose of living in the land, to sanctify the land. That's secular Zionists back in the day. You're asking, all these people part of the Erev Rav. Yeah, that are in the government or not in the government, all these leftists, about living in the land, the mitzvah to live in the land. Come on. They're a bunch of communists. A lot of them. Well, I mean, when they came here, they're a bunch of communists. That doesn't change that much. Their mentality hasn't changed that much, even though, we have a nice economy. It doesn't matter. That's what their mentality is. They don't want religion. They don't want it. If it wouldn't be for Orthodox Jews, it would look a lot worse. A lot worse. Yeah. So I guess more my anti-Zionist stance coming out. Again, can a person do it? They want to be a Zionist. Okay, so be a Zionist. Right? But understand what the Zionists have done. They wouldn't have let, imagine how bad this looks, by the way. Eichmann, they had contact with Eichmann, and they needed money. Germans needed money. So they could have ransomed and given tons of money and ransomed thousands of Jews. They didn't want. The Israelis did not want. They don't want these old European Jews coming here with their old religion. Okay, but imagine how bad that looks. Imagine Eichmann himself, Jew hater as he was. Imagine what he's thinking. Their own people don't want their own people. Their own people are willing to let their own people die. They can save them. I can say all of them, certainly not. They could have saved thousands of people. Thousands of people, it's very well documented. Thousands of people they could have saved. And they did it. Because they didn't want. Is there any greater desecration of God's name than that? It's disgusting. You don't want your own people. Not only that, they have the story of the Ammonites. The Ammonites came here, cut off their pays, cut off their side curls, and made them all secular. Also very well known. A lot of shady stuff with the Zionists. So you say how many, I'm convinced the only real Zionists left in the country are cab drivers, right? I'm not exactly sure why, right? But they're the most strongest Zionists that exist today. Some of them. But again, other people live here, whatever, but we're the true Zionists today. And first of all, the first Zionists that came here weren't secular Zionists. They were students of the Gra, students of Rav Elijah of Vilna, right? And a lot of them died coming here because, draining the swamps, and a lot of them got sick from malaria and other things. right? But the holiness of the land, that's why people should be here. Yeah. Building up the lands religiously, not in a secular way. I'm not even talking about, if you would have got Uganda or Argentina or whatever. Okay, he got Israel. He's lucky. He's lucky to get the land of Israel. We've been happy anywhere else. But, Herzl's great idea to say Judaism was convert everybody to Christianity. Wrote that explicitly. He had, I don't know, one of his kids or more, right, converted to Christianity. That's a great way to say Judaism. This is who you're dealing with. And all his followers. And all these other secular Zionists. That's what they stand for. They don't stand for religion. They don't stand for mitzvahs. They don't stand for learning. They want to make it like everyone else. A place like everyone else. So you go to Tel Aviv and you go to Miami, you feel like you're in the same place, except you hear Hebrew. Okay. Well, a lot of Israelis in Miami also. You hear Hebrew there also. Right? But that's what you're going to hear. So what? What does that have to do with Judaism? It has nothing to do with Judaism. So again, bottom line, you want to wave the flag? Wave the flag. You want to be a big Zionist? Be a big Zionist. Okay. Right? But understand where they come from. Understand what they've done. Yeah, that's the bottom line. Someone asks, so let me see 1 second. Torah said to be wide in the ocean. Does that mean King Solomon knows all the vast wisdom of the Torah? Yeah. They say he knew everything. The hardest thing that King Solomon had to understand was the red heifer. And that he didn't understand fully. Okay. Yeah. But again, he's the wisest of all men. So he had all the knowledge. Right? 100%. Why does the crowd have to be separated? Because people are going to be up, if someone's up there singing and rocking around, whatever beat they're singing to, people are not just going to be sitting in their seats, like, tapping their feet. People are going to be up dancing. Yeah. So they have to be separate. Should be separate. And it's never good to be in a mixed crowd anyway. Right? What's the obvious reason? People talk. People see each other. People schmooze. It's not a good atmosphere. Should be separate. Modesty reasons should be separate. Someone asks, can men and women listen to singers of the opposite sex on the radio? Women can. Men can't. Even on the radio, even if they would never recognize the person. Even if they would never recognize the person. Yeah, because the Gemara says the voice of a woman is licentious. Right? Could be a Jew or a non-Jew singing, doesn't matter. Even if some would say if you don't see the person, it's okay. Or if you would not only not see them, you wouldn't recognize them or whatever. Yeah, but we hold not that way. We hold that a woman singing for a guy is forbidden. Even if a person's married, right? We'll make it even better. If a person's married, his wife has a period, she can't sing in front of him. If she can't sing in front of him, even though she got a period, right? All the more so any other woman can't sing in front of a guy. Or a guy can't listen to a woman sing, let's say better. Yeah? I mean, either way, she can't sing in front of a guy, he can't sing in front of her. Sorry. She can't sing in front of him, he can't be there to listen. Even if he listens on the radio. Even if he had no idea what she looks like. Doesn't matter. Right? That's for a guy, it's forbidden. Can a woman sing to women? Sure, not a problem. Yeah, I've seen, women put up things, let's say on YouTube or whatever, they'll say this is only for, for Orthodox women. And they'll say, no men should be watching this. Well, it's kind of silly. Why put it up there? You don't think men are going to see it? Non-Jews, it doesn't affect. Only by Jews. So secular Jew going to look at it, they're putting it in a stumbling block. Right? It's a big problem. Now, if they want to sing, they want to have albums, this and that, they want to do things in front of women, it's not a problem. Right? That for sure is not a problem. Right? Doing it in front of men would be a problem. Men listening would be a problem. Would definitely be a problem. Somebody asked, what are my thoughts on the murder of Israeli embassy staffers? Yeah, I just heard about it. Tragic. It's absolutely tragic. There's nothing to say. Unfortunately, this happens. This happens. It's hate. Right? free Palestine and this and that, and they have it coming and blah, blah, blah. Right? Obviously, that's how they were supposed to die. That's what's supposed to happen, I guess. As a divine decree. They just, they just did it on their own. Okay. Right? However it is. But yeah, it's tragic. It's horrific. And God forbid it can happen a lot. It can happen a lot. Anti-Semitism is tremendously on the rise. Not surprising. God's protecting us, but things happen. Think about what happened, months ago during the soccer match or football match, depending where you're from. Yeah, in Belgium. Yeah, so the claim would be, the Israeli soccer fans that were there were obnoxious with it. They could be, let's say. Let's say that gives the right for like a whole mob to go after them because they're Israeli. No, I would think, even if you go to a soccer stadium, let's say a football stadium, I would think, okay, even if you want to, root for your team, I would think it'd be a little bit more conspicuous, especially in Europe. Yeah, especially in Europe. But like people don't care. Proud Israelis, they want to root on their team. You think, what's the matter with that? You're in a public place, thousands of people. There's hatred all over the place, plus infinity. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying they had, they deserve to be pummeled and be chased after and like almost be lynched, right? Certainly not. But you gotta be careful. 100% you gotta be careful. Even if you tell me, what happens if, in these stadiums, people drink and whatever. So, people do things they wouldn't normally do because they're under the influence. For whatever reason, okay. But even if you tell me that doesn't give the right to others to like want to kill them or pummel them or, all that. They don't give you the right. Again, you got to go. If someone's going to go, I'm not saying they should, but if someone's going to go, to a football match, soccer match, and the Israelis are playing, and you want to root for the team, I would say look very inconspicuous. Don't say things too loud because people hear. We're not living in a world that loves Jews, certainly by any stretch. And we never have, and now it's just worse. Now it's just worse. So, all the more so if you drink and you say stuff and you're loud, make it look bad. Someone told me last year, was it last year? Or 2 years? No, it was 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago. Someone told me that they're at a hockey game. They're at a hockey game somewhere, professional game, and this guy is like really into it. I guess it looked like an Orthodox Jew. I would assume because that was the context. This guy's yelling and screaming, jumping up, down, this and that. And this whatever. This person, looks Jewish, but is not. I wouldn't say so religious. In different ways. But and this guy's like trying to calm this guy down because here you are. I mean, this is before October 7th. The year before, at least. So this guy's jumping up and down, screaming at a hockey game, and all excited and into it, whatever. And this guy's like trying to calm him down because, he obviously looks like a member of the tribe, and you don't want to bring that much attention to yourself. It's such a thing. You want to go, you want to root for the team, whatever. Right? I'm not gonna go into my rant about sports, but okay, a person wants to do it, whatever. But you don't want to be that conspicuous. You don't want to be so out there and so loud and whatever. They're gonna see who you are. It's gonna be very clear. If you look like an Orthodox Jew, you have a yarmulke on your head, and you're wearing tzitzit or whatever, right? So you're gonna look the parts. So if you're gonna look the parts, I would say tone it down. Otherwise, yeah, it's bringing trouble on yourself. Forget about whether you should be there or not. It's a different issue, but that would be an issue. So, yeah. So the other thing is, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Yeah. Let me see other questions here. Was King Solomon at the level Prophet Moses level of Torah? I don't think so. I think Moses was definitely greater, right? He's the greatest out of anybody. right? I mean, he might have had, world-class knowledge for sure, but, he's not compared to Moses. No one's compared to Moses. Somebody asked Orthodox Jews serve in the Israeli army. Next question. Come on, how controversial you want to get here? I think some people should, 100%. Yeah, it might be good for them in general. Yeah, if they're not going to sit and learn, if they're not going to sit and learn, the problem is what the army is today. Now, people could say, and I heard this argument earlier, people could say, well, we need personnel. Yeah, before that, we wouldn't have said that. That they didn't need people in the army. And the only reason they wanted Orthodox Jews is to, is to make them like them, to make them secular, right? But now the claim is you have separate groups. You have religious groups. You have an ultra-Orthodox group. It's called Nachal Haredi. You have an Orthodox group. I mean, listen, you always had, religious Zionists. They had their groups, so to speak, their units, whatever. And unfortunately, in this war, many of them fell in the last 2 years. Many religious Zionist Orthodox Jews fell. I mean, some of the best in the army. So, if someone's going to sit and learn, and their focus is on learning, then they should be exempt. You need people to serve, 100%. Very few people, just keep in mind, very few people go in as Orthodox Jews, come out stronger as Orthodox Jews. But anyway, the goal of the army, they're going to claim, their claim is, to what do you call it, to, what's the word, to carry the burden, right? I think that's how they call it, right? To, carry the burden, they have to be like everybody else. Why should, secular Jews, why should their kids be, fighting Orthodox Jews, not whatever, right? But again, if they're thrown in the regular army, their religiosity goes out the window many, many times. Many, many times. Yeah. If you tell me, okay, they can be in their own units and whatever, still an issue, right? It's still a very big issue. Still a very big issue. And, you got a lot of things there that standards are not good. We're gonna say, and people are gonna claim this is a milchemes mitzvah. You have to go. Everyone should go. Everyone who can be drafted should be. Now there is what to be said for them because the Israeli army survives on most of the army is reserves. So this thing happened. They called up everybody, and even people that didn't call came. Yeah, more than 350,000 people. I mean, that's a huge amount. They were already trained. Yeah, volunteers also come in, whatever. But these are people that are already trained, already been through the army. Yeah. So again, if it's a milchemes mitzvah, right, then everyone has to go. Same way everyone has to go. We don't have an Urim V'Tumim. We don't, that we could go ask and ask the high priest, is this or it's not? Or someone claimed today, and this is from months ago, but claim that there's no question it is a milchemes mitzvah that it is a very dangerous situation, which it is. Okay, not denying that, right? But they're claiming to draft everybody, or they're claiming we'll leave you with 1,000 people, 2,000 people maximum. We'll give you the best of the best. Everyone else has to serve. That's why they're having a big fight now, trying to draft this law, from when they can take them and when not, and who's going to be exempt, whatever. We need as many people today. The learning level is so low. In general, we need as many people sitting and learning, in order to protect them. I was in Jerusalem earlier today, so in the middle of the morning, all of a sudden I hear a siren. I'm like, really? I mean, it's been sirens almost every day in the country from the Houthis, right? Houthis have to show they're still relevant, so keep sending missiles, right? So the last few have been like in the center of the country. I mean, again, small country, but siren went off, and like everyone went back to learning. Yeah, everyone goes back to learning, whatever. I said my Tehillim, my Psalms or whatever. And it goes on for like, a couple minutes. And then really, if you're in a sealed room, you should really wait 10 minutes to come out. That's like the official law. You got to wait 10 minutes because, you don't know where the shrapnel's gonna fall. But, you're sitting there, you don't know what it's gonna be. You don't know what it's gonna be. And then like some short time later, all of a sudden you hear all these booms. You hear boom, boom, boom. So like, I'm like half an hour, 40 minutes from where I learned. So I called up my wife and I'm like, yeah, we're still in, in the sealed room, whatever. And so later, as I asked, I said, did you also hear the booms? These things are loud. These things are really loud. Yeah. So, it's every time we attack Yemen, so they send things. Even when we don't attack, they send things. Okay, showing their relevance, trying to show their relevance or whatever. So, and most times nothing's gonna happen, with the shrapnel. Because, living in miraculous times, I don't think there's any question. A lot of times the shrapnel hits nothing. Usually. Right? Usually that's what happens. So this happened. Where did it fall? I just heard it fell, probably about half an hour, 40 minutes from here. But it didn't say anyone got hurt. Probably like an open area. Probably the only people that got hurt were running to shelters, whatever. But this is what's going on. Yeah. Now, you did have a missile. So I'm going to say, come on, you had a missile attack and it hit the airport. All right, it hit right around the airport, right? But almost every other missile hasn't, there have been direct hits. The vast majority have hit nothing. You can tell me, okay, they got enough warning, Yemen's further away, they can knock it down easier, whatever. But for goodness sakes, if you don't believe in God, it's like you can believe in the Patriot missiles and you can believe whatever you want. The fact that like none of these things, or just about all of them, don't hit anything in general, it's an unbelievable miracle, right? So most people aren't really so worried as they should be. But a lot of people go another siren, So they'll take cover, they won't take cover, whatever it is. But I don't think anything's going to happen. Why don't think anything's going to happen? Because it never happens in general. In general, it's nothing. Usually, I'm not saying it can't, and I'm not saying it hasn't. Right? But I would say like more than 97% of them have hit nothing. They've been knocked out. Or not only they've been knocked out, some of them don't even make it to Israeli airspace. But they have to put up a siren anyway, just in case, wherever maybe the shrapnel is going to go somewhere. But I mean, for such a small country, it's pretty unbelievable. It is pretty unbelievable. So most people are like, okay, we're used to it. But I'm going to ask you the $10 million question. And the $10 million question is that this is only happening. You look at it at nature and say, oh, patrons are knocking it down, these other things are knocking them down, very good. Do you know people sitting and learning? Right? And they're learning as strong as they can or whatever. You don't have the protection. You will not have the divine protection. Yeah. God will make God will show you, said, oh, you're not learning good enough, you're not praying good enough, you're wasting time when you shouldn't be, and this and that. Okay, so I'll have a missile hit near the airport. It's a wake-up call. But the vast majority hit nothing. They hit open areas. Right? That's the power of Torah. Not the power of the missile, that's the way it looks. Right? The power of the Patriots and whatever. That's the way it looks. But it's really the power of Torah. That's the only thing saving it. In secular Jews, they say, the power of the army, power of our might. That's the worst thing you can say. The absolute worst thing the Zionists can say. Because the more they say it, the worse it is. Because you're going to say it's the power of my hand. What happened to God? It had nothing to do with God. It's the power of my hand. So as my Rebbe would say, that puts the entire Jewish people, especially in Israel, in danger. Tremendous danger. Because you're saying it's the power of my hand to take God out of the picture. That's a problem. That's a serious problem. So, again, you have to have a standing army. I don't think there's any question. I would say maybe for some people, get their life together and be disciplined. Yeah, that might not be bad for the army. Yeah, the vast majority of Orthodox Jews, no. Absolutely not. What is recommended reading on discipline according to Jewish law and values? On discipline, I would say Musar. You learn Musar. Ethics. If you're asking, I would tell you like this. If you read the book, what's it called? Shari Tshuva, Gate to Repentance. You read the third gate. The third gate goes to all the punishments of any sin a person will do. Pretty depressing gate to read. A lot of people probably learn it before Yom Kippur, right? But what the punishment, let's say corporal punishment, person would get for certain sins, what a person would get for other sins that transgress. If you're talking about discipline, discipline actually for yourself or for your kids. So King Solomon says in Proverbs, anyone who spares the rod for their kids, is considered cruel. That doesn't mean you beat them. 100% does not mean that, and the kid will call the police if you do, right? Even like put them in the corner, they might do that. But in general, kids need discipline. So you have to discipline, but you have to know how to discipline. So a lot of good books on child rearing, right? But if you're talking about discipline in the sense of how we ourselves need to discipline, how we ourselves need to discipline ourselves, and that comes in Musar, learning ethics and Jewish philosophy, right? So I would recommend Duties of the Heart. It's a very good book. How to live your life and discipline that way. Derech Hashem's a good book. Also see how the world works. In general, that's what I would say. Someone asked, does the neshama of a Jew, soul of a Jew, have within it that's needed, all that's needed, internal knowledge? Yes. Can the neshama be hidden? And if so, can it be revealed? It can only be revealed when it's no longer in the body. They can only shine, as the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, it can only shine when it's not in the body. In the soul world. The way it can shine in this world, not exactly that way, but it's through Torah mitzvahs. But every soul, even a non-Jewish soul has the DNA to want to search for God, want to search for meaning. Everybody has, right? But the Jewish soul has all the trappings of everything it should be able to do. Now, again, you're going to have different DNA, certainly from your parents, that for better or for worse, good character traits, bad character traits, and then you got to deal with the world, right? So even if you have all the faculties of how to succeed spiritually as a Jew, you got one major thing you got to fight up against, and that's this world, and that's the evil inclination. But Torah is the antidote. We mentioned this many times. Torah is the antidote. Not only is Torah the antidote, but I need God to help me as well. Fight, right? But you have all does the soul, is it capable of fighting against all these things? Yes. When a person's born. But again, it doesn't make it easy. It has all the possibility, but again, it's going to, the Chovos HaLevavos and Duties of the Heart says it's a very major disadvantage. Huge disadvantage. Because once a child is born, all it wants is physical desire, right? Because it comes from because a person was created from the dust of the four corners of the earth. Very good. So every second from that time on, it wants physical pleasure. So very good. So the soul comes in the body, should destroy the body, but it doesn't, gets trapped by the body. So the only way the soul can shine is through Torah and mitzvahs. But the Chovos HaLevavos says the soul is at a tremendous disadvantage because the body is destroying it by going after physicality. The soul has to go after spirituality. The more spirituality, the better, the stronger it becomes. But it's a battle. It's a total battle, right? Till they die, right? It's going to be a battle between body and soul. And hopefully the soul, through Torah mitzvah, is gonna be able to offset, not totally destroy, but offset, I would say. Offset the evil inclination. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not, so to speak, but that's the goal. Here someone says testimony from Nova Festival survivors. Saw things in the sky. They said as soon as the Iron Dome strike down, they depended on that. They expect the cavalry to arrive. Yeah. But there's a whole conspiracy theory what happened. Not that I'm necessarily into conspiracy theories, right? Took a long time, for the army to come. Took like, Seemed like forever. Took hours. Took hours for them to come. Yeah. Until, once word got out what was going on, where the heck was the army? Where were they? Very good question. There's going to be, an inquiry done obviously soon. What exactly, what exactly happens? But that's the fundamental question. Anything like this happens, they should be there on. It doesn't matter if it's a holiday. It doesn't matter if it's Shabbos. They should be there relatively quick. Even though within minutes, it's within a short amount of time. So where the heck were they? Good question. Different theories. What happened? I'm not going to mention them, but there are different theories. There are definitely different theories, but you have to ask the question. When back in the day, more than 20 years ago, when Rabin was killed, no one remembers when Rabin was killed. Yigal Amir, okay, he was a shooter, but he was at close range. Never should have been that close, but okay, he was at close range. And if you see the video, what happens? He got off a number of shots before anyone did anything. Before anyone even reacted. Not that always, it was such a shock and this and that. Normally something like that happens, they react straight away. Straight away. Shabak, as they're known. They react straight away. Some say, he didn't really kill him, and they put him in the car and he killed him there. Okay, different theories. Different theories. One question, though, one huge question is, he shouldn't have had at least 10 seconds and no one did anything. That's a question. That's a question that goes unanswered. Right? Forget about the other conspiracy theories. That's a question that goes unanswered. Yeah. So different theories why. Potential theories why. Yeah. But something like that should never happen like that. In the history, it never happened like that. Guy's there point blank range and he's there for 10 seconds and no one moves. No one around him moves. Part of, secret security and all that have surrounded him. And nobody did anything. They didn't jump him. They let him do it. Well, yeah. Kind of crazy. That's not the norm. That's not what they do normally. It's a normal protocol. There are a lot of things you could ask, not just on that, other things. That seemingly inside jobs or whatever. So what happened to Trump? People say whatever they want. People saw a shooter there. No one did anything. They didn't react. Yeah, a lot of things. Not just with him, with others, potentially as well. But I'm not necessarily a conspiracy theorist, by nature. But there are simple things that there were major screw ups, major screw ups that never, that never happened or it shouldn't happen. Let's say. So you have to at least ask the question, what's going on? Why is it happening like this? So people come up with all kinds of theories. Okay. I'm saying, forget about the theories. Why did it happen like this? When Yigal Amir kills Rabin, why didn't anyone react? Why didn't anyone jump on him straight away after the first shot? These are questions, not my questions. These are obvious questions. So, in this case also, a lot of things are going to hit the fan, certainly. Certainly, but, the army should have showed up straight away. If you tell me it would have taken them 20 minutes to get there, and they weren't mobilized, okay, how long can it take if they're really, that trained well? Took hours. Took hours. People were fending for themselves. But word got out. So it's not like they didn't know. And they didn't hear about it. They heard about it. So I say it's confusion. Who they're going to send? How many people are there? Other things. But again, you know, you call an emergency medical team, let's say. A lot of times, unless something like abnormal happens, they're there in minutes, because that makes up all the time. Because if they get there late, the person could already be dead, right? So, they have a track record. Hatzalah, every community, most Jewish communities have this group of volunteers, of EMSs and whatever, the EMTs, whatever, that come in emergency, Jews, non-Jews, whatever it is. They're there in seconds. Seconds. Yeah. Now, if they're not there in seconds, or they can't send somebody or send someone else, it's like very quick, extremely quick. If you call it Hatzalah, they didn't show up for like 40 minutes. That's something wrong. They don't show up within 10 minutes, something's wrong. Yeah, they have somebody somewhere, to be able to get there like immediately. Like yesterday, they're gonna be there. Someone's gonna be there. Be a first responder. They'll be there straight away. But if you have the system set up the way it is, and you have a major thing like this, okay, they were caught sleeping. Very good. They were caught sleeping. Yeah, so where was everybody else? I mean, not a big country. Where's everybody else? Question. I don't know if we'll ever get to the truth what really happened, but there's a question. A very strong question. But remember, somebody points out, very good. Yeah, you're not waiting for the cavalry here. Cavalry didn't show. Right? So that's one of the reasons my Rebbe would say, why did it hit like that? And why all this confusion and everything else? To show the greatest, military in the Middle East, yeah, they got caught. They got caught really bad. Really, really bad. So that's one thing it shows. The power of our army, power of our mind, power of my hand. Yeah, out the window. Out the window. Bottom line, they look really bad. That's the bottom line. Yeah, whether they're doing all these maneuvers, they think it was going to happen. Okay. Yeah. But, I mean, they blew it in a major way. Major, major way. But one thing you see for sure, I mean, that's one of the tests. That's one of the tests to see. It's like, Mighty's really armored got caught. Like, how could they get caught like that? That's the obvious question everyone was asking. And everyone was saying, we're not, no one's going to say anything or do an inquiry until after, they finally mop up and, finish the job, which is now 2 years later. Yeah. That's a major question over here. Major, major question. Major, major breakdown here. But one of the things it shows, you're going to say the power of my hand? And God's going to say, yeah. I'm going to show you what other people are capable of, and you're so powerful. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion, Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion, the Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos and Q&As, ethics for our fathers. Leviticus, you want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com.